But I have a couple of goals today. The first is to be interesting. You guys have things to do with your life other than listen to people talk at you. My first boss said there was something called the marketplace of time, and you spent your time where you thought there was value. So I hope that you leave here tonight feeling like there was some marketplace of value time. The second is to make Jerry look good. And that it really is because Jerry invited me in, and I want to make sure that he looks good in the end. And hopefully there's something you take away from what I have to say. I have a lot I could say, a lot I probably will say, but hopefully in the end I hope you walk away feeling like you learned something. I'm going to give you a little context about who I am and where I started from, because it helps explain what I was like when I became a CEO, because no one starts as a CEO. And my journey started in 1989. I went to school at the College of William & Mary, Williamsburg, Virginia. And I was dating a girl who was a year behind me, so I wanted to find a job someplace close to where Williamsburg was. And so I took a job at a bank in Richmond, Virginia called Signet Bank. And back then there were regional banks. Actually, Richmond had 3 or 4 of them. And little Signet Bank was a great place to go. They hired me as a management trainee. Everyone gets to be one of those people when they graduate college if you have a finance degree. So I become one. And it really wouldn't have mattered if I didn't join at the exact same time as 2 very interesting people. There's a picture of Rich Fairbank and Nigel Morris. None of you may know them. I'll tell you who they are in a minute. But in this little sleepy bank in Richmond, Virginia, these 2 consultants had a vision. And their vision was, we think we can change how credit cards are issued across the country. Back then, the only way you got a credit card was if you banked with that bank, and they gave you a gold card or a regular card. But there was no balance transfer, mass market solicitation. And these guys had pitched the entire landscape of banks, big banks, little banks, to get them to buy into their vision. And the only one that did was Signet Bank. And you'll know this company more by the name of Capital One. So I was there at the formation of Capital One, which is now a ridiculously large business. Rich Fairbank is actually still the CEO. Nigel's a good friend of mine. He's doing his own thing with all the money he made along the way. But my first job was completely lucky that I joined when these 2 brilliant guys showed up out of Wharton, out of Stanford, with a vision to turn it into Capital One. And I got this ability to go and see the bank. And I kind of thought it was weird in the beginning. You're going to go and you're going to figure out how checks get processed, and you're going to see how credit cards get embossed. You're going to go and figure out how capital is brought into the bank, how they invest their money. You go to the money center. And so we toured the bank for a long time. And it didn't dawn on me till later, but it was probably the biggest gift I ever had as a leader. And so I'll talk today about lessons I walked away with as a leader. And the first one was, the broader your perspective, the more opportunities you have to lead. There are very few people who know how your whole companies work, depending on the size of your company. And I did. Not because I sought it out. They just let me roam around for a year. And as these 2 smart guys decided they wanted to run this business, they looked for people who could answer their questions, because they were consultants. They were guys who came into the business trying to figure out how do we create, test cells and control, and how do we, make great investments in data and drive results. They had no idea how to make technology work or people work. And so I happened to be this young kid walking around who learned all of that, and for whatever reason they thought I could help them. Now, just because you have a perspective doesn't mean you'll be a good leader. And I sort of tripped on myself pretty quickly because I felt pretty good about myself. These really important guys think I'm a very smart guy. I'm going to go around and tell people what to do. I'm going to be the tell people what to do guy, and I'll help them out. And I'm not sure in the moment I knew what I knew or didn't know, but I'm pretty sure that the way I went about doing it didn't work. And I was blessed to have a woman named Monica Bowling pull me in her office one day, and she said, "Brandon, you're a smart guy. Your ideas are very good. Here's the problem, you're an asshole." And people don't like you, and they don't want to work with you. And she didn't say it with any malice or spite or any, she was not trying to tell me I'm a bad human being. She said, "You're just a bad coworker. And you need to figure out a different way if you want to be successful." And I'm really grateful to her to have taken the time to tell me that. And so my second lesson is, don't be an asshole. That's what it is. But also, if you're running a company where you have somebody who you think has talent, who runs around and does things that aren't productive, tell them. I really wasn't trying to be a jerk. I really didn't even know. I was 25 years old. I didn't know at the time what I did well or didn't do well. I had no intent of being a jerk. But I came across to my coworkers that way. And fortunately, someone had the courage to tell me that. They didn't have to. And so I encourage you as leaders to think about, in those moments where you have somebody who's struggling in their interactions with their coworkers, to not judge them or not, oh yeah, they're whatever. Sit them down and have a conversation. They could choose to change or not. That's up to them. But delivering the message is really important. So that was the second message. Get perspective and don't be a jerk. The third one was a fascinating one to me. And believe it or not, watching cars go around in circles made me a better leader. And that may not make sense to you at first, but I went and ran the credit department, which is where in a credit card company, they book all the new accounts. And I get this big job. I'm still very young. I'm not sure I got this role. And I noticed a woman who works for me, her name is Kathy Hammock, has this amazing rapport with people. Like people talk to her, they come in, they chat with her. No one comes to my office. I had the open door policy. My door was always open. No one ever walked in, ever. Hers could be closed. They'd be knocking on the door. Like they would go around me to get to her. And so I said to her, look, how do you do this so well? How are you so good at interacting with people? And she said, well, what do you talk to them about? Well, I'm talking about test cells and analysis and growth. And she said, no. That's not how it works. You've got to find a way to find a point of interaction with them. And I said, what do you mean? So here's our example. She says, first off, a little test here. What is this? NASCAR. Excellent. Anyone know the driver of the NASCAR this is? Jimmy Johnson. Fantastic. In 1992, I had no idea what NASCAR was or who the driver was or what it meant. But in Richmond, Virginia, this is religion. People watch every race. They know every driver. They live and die by this. And so she said, watch it. And then on Monday, come in and talk about it. And so I did. And I learned more about NASCAR than anyone would want to know. I still watch it today. But I knew more that it was Jimmy Johnson. I knew it was the Lowe's, Cobalt Tools, Hedrick Motorsports, Chevrolet. You have to know the driver, the sponsor, the make of the car. And if you learned that, you have an instant connection with people immediately in the area I lived in. Now, this would not work here, probably. You live up in Fontana, maybe. But here, it's not going to work. But there's something similar to create this point of interaction. So the third lesson is be relatable. In some way, shape, or form, come into the office, be relatable, and please don't fake it. You actually really have to want to get to know people. I had a good friend of mine, Matt, who by the same time we had a similar level of responsibility, and he had the same question to me, and so I told him the NASCAR story. And I said, why don't you just come in the morning after the weekend and ask people how their weekends were? Because his EES scores, employee engagement scores, were terrible. So he said, I'll do that. And so for about 3 months, every morning he would ask people how the weekend went, and they would answer him, and he'd go on his way. And his scores got worse. They got worse because they knew he didn't care. It was just a question. How was your weekend? He didn't really want to remember what their kids' names were, and he never built upon the story. He didn't remember one kid played softball, one kid plays baseball, or the mother is sick, or something which allowed you to build on the story over time. And so for whatever reason, I had a great woman who I worked with who helped me figure all that out. And that was important. And so Capital One went along its way and did really well. Capital One went from, when I started there, the assets the company had were less than $500 million. Grew very slowly for the first 3 or 4 years. Then went on this little curve. And that curve continues in life. You go out and look at the Capital One story. If you haven't studied it, it's got nothing to do with Brandon Black. Go study what happened with this company. It's amazing. What Rich Fairbank and Nigel Morris did is one of the greatest growth stories in our country of the last 100 years. And it really is if you study it. But anyway, while I'm there, it goes from $400 million to $10 billion. Things are going great. We're loving it. We IPO'd in 1994. So now I'm a really important guy working for a public company. It's exciting. And the growth got so big, so fast, that the company decided we need some more talent. We need to bring in some more people. We need to make sure that we can keep up with this growth because it's pretty fast. And we love Brandon. He's a smart guy, but he's 27. He's got 5 years of work experience, and we're going from 10 to 20 to 50 to $100 billion. We need to bring in some more talent. And so at the time, I am a big deal. I'm 27. I'm managing a couple thousand people. I report to the president. Like, I've got my ticket written for me. What did I do? I quit. I can look back now and say why I quit. I quit because I was afraid. I was afraid that you hear about people being found out in their lives or there could be a fraud. Well, I was afraid all these smart people from McKinsey and Bain and American Express would come in and go, why is this kid here? And I'll talk about my personal journey, but ultimately, my fear of being rejected caused me to quit a pretty cool thing because I didn't really know what to expect. Now, at the time, if you'd have met me, I would have told you the new people suck. They're ruining the culture. They don't know anything about Capital One. How dare they come here? I was so righteous about what I believed about the company. But in the end, it was just fear. I was afraid. So I left. I quit. I left a lot of money on the table too, by the way. Very stupid financial decision at the end of the day. But I was young, I was stupid, immature, and I didn't really know what I didn't know. So, lesson 4, don't be afraid of anyone who's smarter than you, more experienced than you. Find them, hire them, seek them out. Always try to find ways to learn more. You know, and you're doing that today by being part of this group is learning from other people who can help you get to where you want to go. I was afraid of not being the smartest person in the room. In any room that I went into where I was potentially not, I didn't go in the room. And so I missed out on tons of opportunities the first 15 years of my career because I didn't want to be viewed as a fraud or I didn't want people to judge me. So I was a very judgmental person. And so it just didn't work very well. So I left. And I learned this lesson later and I apply it in my daily life today. So I went to California. You can't move further away from Richmond, Virginia than San Diego, California. It's not humanly possible. So I got away. And I won't say my next career decision was one you would make on your own. We'll talk about what I did. So I joined a subsidiary of a company called Sun America, which doesn't really exist anymore. They're part of AIG. And here were the facts at the time. 1, the management team at the time was accused of defrauding the owners. 2, was losing money. And 3, it was a debt collection business. Now, faced with those facts alone, most people do not join it. It's not something they want to do. The saving grace for me was, at the time, the CEO of Sun America, and I'll talk about this weird theme through my life, which is billionaires. Kind of Eli Broad. Remember Eli Broad? Now he's a big philanthropist up in LA. Sat us in a room, me, I was the chief operating officer, the CEO and the CFO who was trying to bring together and said, I promise you we'll continue to fund this thing. We know it's a good business. We're going to make it work. You guys come in, make it happen. And so I took Eli's word, although he yelled at me a lot in the 5 meetings I had with him because it didn't work very well. But I joined this company. Now, when I said debt collection, many of you had something in your head. If you think about it right now, think debt collection, close your eyes. I guarantee you come up with either this picture, right? Some guy with a bat, you know, probably an Italian guy with a bat. If I'm an Italian here, I don't mean that. But there's some kind of stereotype. Or this little thing here which says, if you already sent us your payment, please accept our apology for the death threat and have a happy holidays. Debt collection is not a business people want to go into. It's not something they want to do. It's not something, if you asked you to write down 100 industries you want to be in, it would not be on anybody's list, not one single person's list. But I had the belief that actually those caricatures were the opportunity. It was actually run at times by Neanderthals. It wasn't very sophisticated. There wasn't much technology applied to what they do. And so we believe that, look, with analytics, with decision science, we hired a head of behavioral science work for the company, we could create something different in the collection space. And so that's what we embarked to do. This is 1998. Left Capital One, got lots of scars, but here we go, we're going to take off. Sadly, it didn't go as well as planned. Our good friends at Sun America immediately backed out of their deal. They decided they're not going to fund our business. Good luck. We wish you well. And we went around. We talked to a lot of people. There was no solution. So the only option we had at the time we saw was bankruptcy. Because we had 60 days worth of cash. Sun America had a lot of money. They could have funded it. They stopped doing it. And so the CEO, the CFO, Carl Berry, and I sat down and said, what do we do? Like, what are we going to tell our employees? We could see no other option. And Carl said, let's just tell them the truth. Let's tell them where we are. Let's tell them how much cash we have. Let's tell them what it will take to be successful. And if they could work hard, they could buy us some time. But let's look them all in the eye. Let's get in a conference. We get in a big room, and let's just tell them. And if they all leave, then they all leave. We all go find new jobs. But if they all stay, we figure it out. And they stayed. Not a single human being quit. We told them all we had 60 days worth of cash. It was going away unless we found a way to make it work. And it was amazing to me because I wouldn't have bet that. If you were to put money in Vegas about what was going to happen after we sat down and had that conversation, I'd have gone with they're all out of here. But they weren't. And they all stuck around and they were unbelievable. And so my 5th lesson is this. You ever remember this is from? What's the big thing he says? You can't handle the truth. He's wrong. People can handle the truth, any truth, as long as it's the truth. People want to know what's going on and what the truth is. And as a leader, I didn't. And many people I work with today are afraid. I didn't feel like I could. And we feel like we're protecting people by not telling them the truth. But I would ask any of you, would you want to be lied to? No one would say yes. Everyone would say, I'd want to know. I'd figure it out. But people want to be part of something. They want to work things through, and so they can handle the truth. So we survived. We made it through. The people worked incredibly hard. Somehow we begged, borrowed, and stole our way to raising some money. We ultimately got bought by a company called Midland Credit Management in Phoenix. And back to my weird billionaire speech, this company is owned by two people. Anyone know either of these people on the screen? That's Nelson Peltz. If you read Business Today, Nelson is a very famous, now activist shareholder in places like Kraft and DuPont and Wendy's. And this guy's Kerry Packer. He was the richest guy in Australia at the time. So here's this tiny little worthless company owned by two billionaires. It's now my second and third billionaire to work with. I don't tell you that to name drop. I just found it fascinating that these guys with all this money are spending time thinking about debt collection in the U.S. And sometime over a drink, I'll tell you about meeting Kerry Packer at the Bellagio. He was a very famous gambler, one of the first whales in the world. And his experience in Vegas is very different than our experience in Vegas is, at least my experience in Vegas.
Tell us now.
No, too long of a story. Too long of a story because I have a time limit, but I'll tell you later. So these guys buy into our vision. They give us some money. We didn't have tons of money. We figured it out. And it starts to work. 2000 goes well. 2001 goes well. 2002 goes well. 2003, we go public. Now we're a public company. By the way, if any of you are thinking of becoming a public company, talk to me. Not a good idea. Unless it's the only way you can raise capital, not a good idea. For a whole host of reasons, and don't let it be your ego because you want to tell somebody you're the CEO of a public company or an employee of a public company. It's really not worth it. Different story as well. But we went public, and the company continued to do well. And it was, upward trajectory, everything up to the right, big growth until January 2005. And then things changed overnight. So in our business, it's pretty simple. So at Encore, we bought, so you hear collection firms, the two kinds of collection firms, effectively. One who does work for other people. So they give you assets and they pay you 35 cents on the dollar to collect the dollar and you give them the money back. In our case, we bought the assets. So we became the de facto creditor. So we went to Bank of America and Wells Fargo and these large institutions and bought huge pools of receivables. We paid them for it and then we collected from them, those consumers. So we were the creditor, we had time to collect from them. And we paid, this is cents on a dollar. So for 2001, 2, 3 cents on a dollar, 4-ish cents on a dollar. 2004, 5 cents. 2005, 10 cents. And you may think at first blush, well, 5 goes to 10. It's still a small number. 90% increased. December 2004 to January 2005, the price of all raw materials went up 90%. So let me turn that into the economics for our business. Yes?
Why are they selling it that cheap? Is it bad debt for them?
It's bad debt for them.
Okay.
And most people don't pay you. So I'll tell you the economics of the business.
Okay.
Great question. So here's essentially the economics. You buy a portfolio. You spend $100. You're going to collect about 3 times what you paid for it at the time. So if you spent 4, you're going to collect 12. That's like 20% of the people paying 60% of what they owe. Most people don't ever pay you, actually, at the end of the day. It didn't pay us. So $100 for the portfolio. You're going to collect $300. Our cost to collect was about 50 cents on a dollar. So we spent $150 to collect the dollar, profit of 50. Invest 100, get 50. Pretty good business. That's over a period of time. And so the IRR is in the sort of mid-teens. Unlevered IRR, very nice business. Everybody understand this math? It's pretty simple math, right? January 1st, I only increased the price 75% because it was easier for me to do the math that way. 100 becomes 175. Collections don't change. We can't create payers. Like this number is finite. There are only so many people who are actually going to recover and actually pay us. This doesn't go up proportionally. Our competitors thought, oh, pay more, get more. No, it doesn't work that way. Cost to collect didn't change either. Still 50 cents on a dollar. So now I went from making $50 profit on my $100 investment to losing 25, literally overnight. And which brings me to my next lesson. Always have a contingency plan. If you're not thinking about what could go wrong in your business, you should do that. All day, every day, just have a little idea and have a plan for it. Now for us, we didn't have one. So we adopted what I call the try everything plan. Do a whole bunch of stuff and hope one of them works. So we had to change our costs, so we opened up a site in India. Low cost, go to India. The price of our raw materials are really high, buying stuff from banks. Let's buy something new. Let's buy healthcare receivables. Let's go buy co-pays for services you receive at a hospital. Sounded very smart, very good. So now we're going to lower costs. We're going to buy new receivables. We said, instead of buying little deals every now and then, let's buy a couple. Let's go do a big deal. Let's go spend $100 million at a time. And so we did this really huge deal. And last but not least, we bought a company. So in 8 months, we opened a site around the world. We bought the first company we ever bought. We bought the biggest deal we ever bought. And we started buying stuff we knew nothing about. And I became CEO. So this is me pounds ago and less gray hair ago. But October 2005, I become CEO. This is a great year, kind of, in my life because a lot happened. But we didn't have a plan. We knew we had to reduce costs. We knew we had to diversify. We knew that we needed to buy assets differently than we had in the past. And so we did all of that. And you'd have thought this was, a good time. Stock prices, Encore stock price, by the way, stock hangs in there. This is why ultimately I think being a public company CEO doesn't help. You've got a daily measure that other people put on your business, one way or the other, independent from what it's really worth. Now, if you're you got an app guy, you probably want to be a public company because you're making a ridiculous amount of money and invite me to be on your board if you ultimately do that. But our stock was doing pretty well, so I get appointed CEO. Been a year in transition. I'm feeling pretty good. We've got some time. We got a lot of initiatives going on. And then, at this time I was going to step forward as going to be the leader, but this didn't start. And then you think around and go, okay, what did I just get myself into, right? Everybody wants to be the leader, wants to go into it, but you actually don't want it to be really choppy. You want it to be pretty smooth. These investments are all going to work out. I'm going to get high five. The shareholders make a lot of money. It's all going to be good. It didn't go that way. Pricing kept going up. So 9 peaked at 14. So I showed you the math at what happened at 9. Imagine what happens at 14. So pricing keeps going up. India didn't work. We had all kinds of issues. Couldn't get it off the ground. It was terrible. Healthcare didn't work. And the acquisition we bought shrunk rather than grew. So everything we tried, the one thing that did work was the big deal. Everything else failed. And we're all looking around ourselves like, what's happening? We're smart business people. Diversification, cost reduction, new assets. This is what business people do. We do smart things. We diversify along the way. But again, now without a lot of thought. Totally reactive, not proactive. And sooner or later, our shareholders figured it out. Results weren't very good. Stocks going down. Here, when I became CEO, it was around 18. By the middle of 2007, it's 10 or 9. And it's going in the wrong direction. And so I'm trying to figure it out. Like I'm swimming in it. And I was really, I was struggling to be a CEO. In 2 years I had been the CEO. Nothing had worked right. And I blamed it on the wrong time, and I hired the wrong management team. We did the wrong things. And it was never really about me at the end of the day. And so I had 2 gifts in 2007 that paid off for me really well. One was my wife that we talked about earlier, who ever since we started dating, I had me go see a therapist. I'm not sure why, but partially to sort of make sure that our relationship would work. We both were divorced, so let's make sure we don't make mistakes. But she had me, the first person made me think about who I am as a person. The other was we partnered with a company called Learning is Leadership, and this is my coach. His name is Shane Hughes. And these are the 2 people in my life who didn't listen to my excuses, whatever they were the day. Oh, so-and-so didn't do the healthcare thing right, and if we had just gone to the Philippines, not India, and all this other stuff, we'd all been fine. And both of them said, look, it's not about all that, it's about you. Like you can decide right now whether you want a different future for Encore or not. But stop blaming people. And again, they did this kindly. They weren't yelling at me. But it was stop being a victim of the world you operate in. And so the most important lesson for me is always have somebody who will give you the unvarnished truth, and as many times as necessary. Someone who will look you in the eye and just tell you what you need to hear in the moment. And both Shane and Dana did. It was huge for me because I had lived all this time trying to figure out, how do I not be a failure? And I had a lot of excuses, right? I hired the wrong people. We did the wrong things. We did too many things. We diversified too quickly. I had plenty of excuses why if Encore failed, it wasn't my fault. In the end, I was the leader of the business. And so I had to decide whether I wanted to do something different or not, or at least introduce the possibility of a different outcome, because the outcome was fairly certain at this point in time. And so I decided that if the company was to succeed, I had to evolve as a human being, as a leader, as a boss. And we Learning as Leadership does a process where they go around and they get feedback from your direct reports in very gory and graphic detail, where they go through it with you in the end to understand what you don't do well. It's not really to tell you what you do well. We all know what those things are. But what aren't you doing well, and what are the costs of that? And so there are 5 things I had to work on. The first was stop debating with people. Now, on the surface, debating with people, in my mind, was a good way to interact with people. Oh, we're kicking around ideas. It's a good thing. Like, Ron's got an idea, I've got an idea. We'll kick it around. What I didn't realize is we never went with Ron's idea, ever. We kicked things around and always ended up with my solution, or me taking ownership of his solution. Like, I was really adept at stealing his idea, and it sounded pretty smart probably in the moment. And so at some point, Ron just gave up. And I needed to find a different way to do that. And what I connected to through this program was I wasn't trying to steal his idea. I was just afraid that people in the room would see he was right, I was wrong. I had a great fear of being wrong. And so in that moment, like if I'd have gone, Ron, that's an awesome idea, they'd have all gone, well, your idea was stupid. So, and you're the CEO, why would you say something so stupid? And because I judge people all the time, that's what I assume people were doing with me. And so I had this debating thing, but really what I had to do is appreciate the impact I was having on the team and what that meant. The second thing was to delegate more, and they're connected, but allow people to do more things. Again, in my head, when the ship is, listing at sea, you're the captain, you're making all the decisions, when in fact you can't. All you can do is look straight ahead and not hit a wave. Someone else has to put the fuel in the engine. Someone else has to make sure people get fed. Someone else has to make sure they're looking out on other sides to get things done. And I was unaware of all of those jobs. But I viewed myself as the captain. I'm on the ship. I'm deciding where to go. I'm doing CEO stuff. And I really wasn't connecting to what's the detriment of me doing that. I had to tell people what I was worried about. I was afraid of even though I learned, being honest is great, you could do it. In crisis, I went back into my shell, and we didn't talk about what we were really worried about, what I was worried about. And so people looked around going, does he not see that we're in a massive hurricane right here? Like, is he unaware of that? Because I was happy, and I was in the office, it's all great, even though I'm arguing the whole time. But I felt like I had to play this role of, I'm the calm, cool duck. No one's going to know that something's wrong in the company, when in fact there was a lot wrong, and a lot wasn't going well. And so now everyone's like, is he stupid? Like, he's saying it's all great. Do you not see that we haven't bought a healthcare portfolio in years, and Ascension is sinking, and India can't get off the ground? Shouldn't we have that conversation about what's going on? But I had a little bit of, click your heels 3 times, you'll go home. And the Dorothy strategy does not work either. So you can't go with the try everything, and you can't go with the Dorothy strategy. The most important lesson in all of this was to keep people focused. And it's something I preach to people all the time, but when things get difficult, you do fewer things, not more things. And I think our tendency is to do more things, which means you don't do anything well. And so I had done this try everything theory, which meant people were spread incredibly thin. And we couldn't get anything done well. And so I needed to figure out what the focus needed to be for the company and keep people on task. And finally, I had to hold people accountable. Instead of, if things weren't working, call them on it. Have the conversation. But I was a little paralyzed right here. My ego was bruised. The company was sinking. The investments that I chose to do weren't working. The stock's down. And so in that moment, you want to think you're going to be the person who charges out ahead and you're going to lead everybody else. But I was afraid. Like, I had my whole tombstone written in the moment, and it wasn't very good. But I decided to work on these things. And I connected to the cost of the company of me not doing it. And I couldn't ask other people to work on themselves if I don't work on myself. How can you ask someone to go work on themselves and to get better if you're unwilling to do it yourself? And so we did. And oddly enough, a moment came in late 2007 which changed the fate, I think, for all of us. The world hadn't gotten any better. Pricing, I said, was up. Our shareholders were getting really annoyed. We hadn't addressed our cost situation. Most times when returns are going down, you make a cost adjustment somewhere, unfortunately. And so we had to lay people off. And I had never laid anybody off in my life. Never had the conversation, knew what it was like. But as a leadership team, we got in a room and said, how do we want to do this? Right? How do we want to be seen the day after this happens? And we had a very long discussion about what we wanted for the people that were being let go and what we wanted for the people who were sticking around. And we came up with a strategy that actually jarred us into a reality. I mean, at the end of the day, a whole bunch of people had to get fired because of the decisions we weren't making. Because we didn't make the right strategic decisions, because we didn't think far enough ahead not to stop hiring in advance. And so it's sobering to realize you are going to make a decision that's going to impact 100 people's lives that did nothing wrong but join your company. And I think we all connected to that emotionally. That's the work we were doing with Learning as Leadership is, how do you connect, how do you get beyond intellectual agreement? Everyone knew we had to cut costs. The math was clear. Everyone could do math. If you're making 10, spending 12, you're not doing very well. 12 has to become 9, regardless of the situation. And so we all agreed we were going to go into this process and we would change the culture of the company. We'd go from being conflict avoiders and judging people and being in a situation where we're at the mercy of the world. It's the other people paying too much for the portfolio. It's the new groups don't know what they're doing. It's whatever the excuse were, people fighting about things. So when things aren't going well, I think naturally folks end up blaming somebody else, because again, no one wants to say it's my fault. And we said, we're going to change the culture, right? Instead of looking and complaining and blaming, we're going to deal with issues as they come up. We're going to clarify what each other's means in a room. We're going to make sure that we communicate as an organization. And we took 4 goals. And the 4 goals were, 1, be transparent in learning and development. Know what you need to work on and be clear about it with your boss, with your coworkers, with your subordinate. But we had people in jobs who were in the biggest jobs of their lives. There's no way they could do it on their own. They needed help. We needed to be clear what that help was. And we went as far to understand what are things that trigger other people. So, example, I had a great direct report, Jim, and about 4 times a year, Jim and I would get in this debate. I don't even know how we got in a debate. It wasn't the Ron Brandon debate. It was just like something set him off, and I had no idea where it would come from. And through work we did with this group, Learning as Leadership, we figured out for him, his trigger was when he felt like other people were being labeled. And he grew up as a kid who was labeled as dyslexic. And he wasn't dyslexic, he outgrew that. But when he felt like someone else was being labeled, it was a huge issue for him. And so we ultimately figured out that's when I would say something that he felt like I was judging someone or labeling somebody, for him, he had to come to their defense. We're debating. Well, as soon as I understood what his thing was, I just didn't do it anymore. This transparency about things that we're trying to work on is really important. And so we had some breakthroughs around how to work together as humans that made a difference. The second thing was get rid of the us versus them. We either succeed or we don't. We said every structure in the company was around collective success. Every job. If you're a salesperson at Encore, you made money if the company made money, not because you did a deal. Whatever it might have been. But we were either going to win together or we were going to fail together, but there were not going to be individual groups that work. The third was have more discussions around issues and ideas to make sure you're only working on the ones that make a difference. And my example is, I used to ask people, do you know the difference between beating up an idea or a person? And it's actually a tough one. People have ideas and all of a sudden it becomes, let me tell you how, Ron, how good you are or aren't in your idea, rather than, oh, interesting, let's have a conversation about that. So we need to have more conversation with less judgment. And finally, just stop complaining and find a way to get everyone on the same page. And the common theme through all of this is the next lesson I'll give you, which is separating the judgment from the content. There were a lot of conversations that had to happen. There was no judgment required. We didn't have to think about whether the person was stupid, not good enough, not working hard enough. In the end, something was broken. Let's have that conversation. Without blame, without judgment, without pointing fingers at somebody. But you have to talk about the content. And for a long time, we couldn't do it because they were intertwined. I decided you weren't doing your job because you were stupid. And so I can't talk about the thing that's not working because I would say it in a way where you knew I thought you were stupid. And so that didn't go very well. And so we just didn't talk about issues. It didn't happen. But this was the thing that was getting in the way every day, was separating the content from the judgment. So the other thing we did was get focused, as I said. And we decided we had a board member, John O'Rose, who said he joined the board in 2007, and we had a conversation, spent the entire day having a conversation. And all the things we're going to do. In the end, he said, I just have one question. What are we great at? The answer was nothing. We're good at a couple things. We're going to try a couple things. We're not really great at anything. He said, we should be great at something. Because until you're great at something, you can't actually achieve the results you want, nor can you attract other people to want to be part of your thing. Be great at something, you can then monetize that, you can grow upon that. And so we decided to be great at two things. One was we were going to figure out India. I'll talk later about the India story. And again, this is a time and age where outsourcing in India is viewed very negatively. The whole outsourcing thing, it was always viewed as limiting American jobs, a terrible thing, but we needed to figure this out. The second was we were going to figure out who our customers were. And you may think, oh, you know who they are. You collect from them. Our customers are not on any radar you've ever heard of. There's no name you've ever heard of them. They're not subprime. They are people who are in a complete personal financial recession. And no one understands how they got there, how they get out, how they decide to get in or out. And if we could figure that out, it would be both helpful in a broader discussion, but also help our business. And so we're going to be great at these two things. And we set out to do that. Now, in India, it was hard. The challenge is hard. You can imagine. We're making a call from India to the United States about collecting a debt. Now, everyone's got the caricature in their head, right? The highly, they've got the accent and they can't communicate and you don't want to talk to them. This is when Microsoft or someone's pulling their agents back because they didn't like the whole experience, Intel. And we're doing a collection phone call. It's even worse. Now, from the US lens, we don't like it. From an Indian lens, they're calling people asking them for money for 2 or 3 years worth of wages. So their barrier is like, how do I ask somebody for the next 3 years worth of pay? So we're doing that. We're doing it in the middle of the night because it's 13 and a half hours difference. And so the people we're hiring are working in the middle of the night. They're all 24 because, quite frankly, the accent in India is almost negligible if you hire people that are younger than 30. And so we need to hire younger people. It's amazing what they did. And on top of all of it, the US workforce wanted it to fail. Fear was rampant. People didn't want it to work. They wanted it to fail because that meant they'd all lose their jobs. So India was a tough thing, and I'll talk later about what we were able to create. But the thing we wanted to do was very hard, but I was very focused on getting it done. And we struggled for a year or two, but we ultimately figured out a formula for it. And I didn't figure it out. Our call center managers figured it out because they were tired of people talking at each other, and they humanized each other. They created a vision, one team, one dream. They started having conference calls where you could see the person, so video conferences. So now they weren't people 13 and a half hours away. There was a human being on that they were looking at a screen, and they traveled a lot. And all of a sudden, those barriers started to come down because it's easy to demonize someone you've never seen, right? And again, I don't know what your political affiliation is, or I guarantee you in your life you demonize somebody that you've never met, don't know anything about. If you're a Democrat, you demonize Republicans. Republicans demonize Democrats, whatever it might be. We live in a world of demonization. Not all of you. So if you say, I don't do it, I don't really mean all of you. But at the end of the day, we live in a society where it's all about pitting one group against the other. And here you've got all the backdrop of, the press just saying this is an awful thing to do. And so what I learned from that, at the end of the day, is we all want to be part of something. No matter where you live, no matter what you do. You don't want to destroy something. I went to India in 2009, and met with the collector, our top collector. And he comes up to me, and he grabs me. He looks me in the eye, and he says, I want you to go back and deliver one message. I said, what's the message? He goes, I don't want any of the employees in America to think that we want to succeed if they lose their job. Now, that is a very religious context in India. There's a lot about the Hindu religion, which you do not want to succeed while someone else perils. And he was very clear and he was very succinct in his message, and I brought it back. But they wanted to be part of something. They also didn't want to be a number. They didn't want to be 1,000 random human beings across the world. They want to be part of something that worked. And that's ultimately what we strive to do, was to create something where we connected people across the globe doing this activity that no one really wants to do to begin with, and do it in a way that no one else could do it. And I think we ultimately achieved that. But it didn't change the facts. Pricing was still up. All this great work we're doing ourselves is awesome. Pricing is just struggling. And our break came in September 2008. What happened in September 2008? Lehman blew up. Bear Stearns blew up. The whole financial market imploded. That was our break. Now you would think, that's odd. Why is that a break for you? It was a break for us because while it was a dark day for the general economy, it was awesome for us. Partially because our industry was bolstered by the cheap capital, just like the subprime mortgages. The people that are paying 14 cents on a dollar had no business doing what they were doing, but there was money flowing everywhere. The spigots were on. You were getting cheap capital. And so it wasn't the subprime mortgage problem. It was a capital access problem. And it shut down immediately. It went from full on to off. And so we knew our competitors were going to fail now, because the only reason they were succeeding, we knew the math. We knew the math I showed you. If 4 went to 14, no one's making any money. And we're struggling trying to get by, but we knew it was going to blow up. And the good thing for us is, back to having a contingency plan, we suspected it. Our board suspected it. And 2 months before the crash, we raised $100 million. And so we had our contingency plan. We had capital. And we knew the world was going to blow up, and we were ready to go. Now, our shareholders were not convinced. If you were to go back and read the headlines back then, the assumption was if the economy's in the tank and banks are in the tank, debt collection firms have to be just obliterated. Like, you guys are definitely going to fail. So our stock went from then around 10, 11, 12 to 2 and change, 268 or something's the number. And so again, I'm thinking to myself, are you kidding me? Like, we did all the right things. We started doing the India thing. We were disciplined in buying. We raised the capital, and now we're at 268. This is why, again, being a public company, never good. And you're waking up every day watching, if you had a net worth, it'd go away. But I thought I had a board we were in solidarity. We were going to work together. But my board invested in the company when the stock was at 10, back a little earlier. So their personal investments were down 70%. And so I think they got a little bit worried. And so I think the board sided with the shareholders. This is my friend George Lund. He actually is my friend George Lund. It's the only picture I could find of him on the internet. And the board came to me one day and said, we've made a decision. We're going to bring in George as the executive chairman. We're going to create a new role for you. We're going to call you the CEO, because you are, but we're going to have the CFO, the head of HR, and the general counsel report to George. And so in that moment, like, all of a sudden I'm back to this sort of kid again around, oh my God, they're going to fire me. This is all set up to get rid of me. Because I was pretty sure that stock's at 3, can do the math. Now my tombstone is Brandon Black became CEO at 20, got rid of him at 3, good riddance. You know, I've got that in my head. I'm playing it out, because no matter how much development I had done, no matter how much work I had done on myself, like, this thing happens, you're trying to figure it out. So I'm in this death spiral. I'm confused. I'm depressed. I drink more than I probably should. But I can't figure out, like, why is this all happening at once? Back to woe is me. And the same thing happened, the same gifts I had earlier came back. So Shane and I had been working together for the last 4 years. And so he said, wait a minute. I know you think they're going to get rid of you, but what evidence do you have they're going to get rid of you? Right? And so they have a saying, which is, what would the camera do? Like, if there was a picture in the room when you were talking to the board or George, what would it say? You know, would the camera say, was he winking at the other board members saying we're going to get rid of you, or what really happened? And so we did a little excavation, and we concluded, look, they told, George walked in day one and said, I'm not going to be the CEO, Brandon is. The board said the same thing. The employees that reported to George continued to take direction from me, so the facts actually didn't change. The one fact that was clear was I actually needed some help. Like, this was going to work, and all of a sudden we had a smart guy. Back to go find the smart people. Like, I had this smart guy, very experienced person. I could, in the moment, just quit again, which was a real possibility, or I could find a way to embrace George and these changes and move things forward. And for whatever reason, I didn't quit. Part of it was Shane saying, do you want to repeat Capital One? Part of it was I was grown up, a little bit older. But I said, okay, let's turn this into a positive. And so my second to last lesson is, don't be the star in your own reality TV show. Right? I created an environment that didn't exist. And we live in a reality TV world, right? Everyone watches all this crap. Right? We're voyeurs in people's lives. And so we assumed that, hey, we're in it. I assumed I was in it. Thought I was a star in the Encore Capital reality TV show. But don't do that. Like, don't create stuff that's not real. And I was able to work through that, and we got refocused. So we got focused on 3 things. One is doubling the company. Okay, everything's hard. The banks aren't selling. The financial markets are in ruin. The stock's at $2. Still, it's going to double the company. Let's drop our cost by 15%. And let's really become an expert in the distressed consumer. Like, if there was ever a time to know something about the distressed consumer, it was the last 5 years. Because there were a lot of them. To put it in perspective, in 2009, banks charged off $100 billion worth of credit card debt. Just credit card debt. Forget everything else. $100 billion. $1 trillion industry, 10% losses. Encore, when I left, owned about $120 billion worth of distressed debt. We knew these consumers. We knew what they were about. And so we're going to go do these 3 things. Now, it would have been easy if the world wasn't kind of turning against us again, because coming out of the financial meltdown, everyone was looking for what? What can you remember about the aftermath of the financial meltdown? Somebody to blame. Somebody to sue. right? And so this thing was created, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And they came and said, consumers can't look out for themselves, we're going to do that. Nonprofit groups wrote these manifestos about debt collection and how awful we were and how bad the lending industry is. And the reason we're in this is everyone gave too much money to good people, and these are all the bad people. And in our case, we had the great pleasure of being sued by the state of Texas and the state of Minnesota for, long story, but for an affidavit-related issue, which I don't want to get into at the end of the day. Irony is, we had an operating site in Texas and one in Minnesota. Of all the states to not get sued in, it would have been those two. So you've got the federal government coming down on us, these nonprofit groups peppering the waves of that, and then we're getting sued. So I think it's my last lesson. There's one more, which is an important one, which is back to investments. What we hadn't done, and this is really important, is get to know the people who influence your business, especially in a regulatory environment. I always thought, well, why go talk to the politician here in San Diego? They don't want to talk to me. So when the shit hit the fan and we had to go talk to influence makers, they didn't know who we were. Okay, they just assumed we were a bad guy. The nonprofit people said you're a bad guy. Texas says you're a bad guy. The CFPB says you're a bad guy. You must be a bad guy. And so we didn't put any effort into gaining favor with the constituents that could help us in this environment. So don't go talk to those people when you need them. They're not going to. It's like don't go ask for money when you need it. Don't go look for favors when you need it. Meet the people early on. It's the thing I regret the most. That we put no. It was simple. This is really simple. Give a couple dollars to a couple politicians. Show up at some fundraisers. Go to Sacramento twice a year, and it worked out fine. But it's really important to know who can influence your business externally and get to know them and be friends with them, or at least talk to them. We didn't do that. Despite that, it worked. So we get to the punchline now. So you're all getting tired of listening to me babble. Here's Encore. So here's Encore's growth from 1999 to 2008. We made the double the company pledge in 2008. In 2012, we were at 950. This is millions of dollars. So we went from when I started, it was 39 million in revenue. The full year before I left was $950 million in revenue. So we doubled the business. And we did it at a time where the entire rest of the world went the other direction. This is when the economy imploded. No one grew in this period of time. And most of our industry went away. 80% of the industry disappeared. So 25% compound growth at a time. Your industry went away and the world went in the tank. Our costs, we took our costs from 50 cents to collect a dollar to 40, the high 30s, low 40s. We collected $1 billion, it's called $1 billion the last year. We dropped our costs by about 1,200 basis points. That's $120 million worth of cash we didn't spend running the business that we would have just a few years earlier. So we grew incredibly rapidly and we massively changed the cost structure of the company. And a big reason for it is what we did in India. Something that no one could work. No one had believed it could work. We went from collecting this fractional amount in 2007 of $12 million to the last year I was there, we collected almost $250 million in India. At 10 cents on a dollar, not 40 cents on a dollar. So that's $75 million of the $100 million of savings is figuring out how to collect halfway around the globe at the exact same rates due in the US, same performance, no degradation, lower attrition, and the beach had ultimately allowed us to build analytics and software development, a lot of things over there. But this drove, the thing we strove to do, this was going to fundamentally change our business and save us, that's $100 million in annuity. Right? We're saving that every single year. So India worked. And as a result, the stock price went up. So back to the point where I was going to quit in 2009 when they were going to get rid of me. George was the bad guy. When I left, the stock was $38. So it went up 1,200% in that window of time. So we focused on the things that mattered. We paid attention. We had to jump up and down.
Yeah, it turns off every hour.
Every hour. I like that. There we go.
Yeah, if you do jumping jacks.
There you go. I got it. So ultimately, our job is to return value to the shareholders. The stock goes up. Now, that wasn't our goal, was just financial. We just have financial goals at the end of the day. That was a big goal. And I'm very proud of what we accomplished as a group because we did achieve financial goals that were pretty spectacular. At the same time, we actually started a research institute that brought together nonprofit groups, the Urban Institute, major scholastic organizations, UT, UCLA, focused on trying to understand our consumer. So I hired a guy. He had his PhD in neuroscience, was a researcher before he joined us. He worked at McKinsey. He knew all these people. He knew Craig Fox and and Josh Zinman, these guys who were doing things, innovators for poverty action. But we brought together people, back to my slide earlier, regulators. We brought together people from Washington. We brought together nonprofit groups. We brought together academic institutions to study these consumers and figure out what was going to happen. And have published some pretty cool works. This is the first private-public partnership between the Urban Institute and anybody. The most renowned, researcher that the government relies on is now doing work with this tiny little firm in San Diego, and we funded the CCRI. So we developed this institute. I think they're producing, it's not there anymore, some great research about our consumers. We did some other things, little things that matter. We became San Diego's healthiest workforce in 2011 and 2012. And, most people think about call centers as people who aren't particularly healthy, but we committed to developing some cutting-edge benefit programs and wellness programs, did that. We are one of Fortune's fastest growing companies in 2012 and 2013. And we were one of the top 50 companies to work for in India, in all of India, as judged by the Great Place to Work Institute for 3 years in a row. And that's the thing I'm most proud of, because everybody would have bet against us. Everybody would have bet against us. And when I talk about the award we got, this is the list of the people on the list. So 1 was Google, 2 was Intel, 3 was Marriott, 4 was American Express, 13 was Encore, 14 was Microsoft, 15 is Taj Hotels, and 19 is FedEx. These are world-class brands, and our tiny little debt collection company is the 13th best company to work for in all of India, and across the entire country. And it was relentless focus. It was hiring amazing people who did amazing things, and it was, again, something that I don't think anyone could happen. There still is no debt collection firm in India but us of any scale, it transformed the organization. Allowed the company to go into other English-speaking areas like the UK and bring the cost down as well. So it's a pretty impressive thing in my estimation, part of it because I was there, but we worked hard. So my last lesson, and I forget what your motto was, but at the end of the day, you can't do it alone. And this is a slide from the presentation before I left, but we had an amazing group of people. And if you're leading a company, go hire amazing people and give them the rope to go run and not hang themselves. Or don't let them hang themselves. Let them go and get things done. But we had an amazing group of people, our teams in India, our teams in the US, and we all pulled together to create something pretty special from a place and time where it could have gone a whole bunch of directions. And my belief of how we got there was, at the end of the day, we decided to look in the mirror, decide that we were getting in our own way, and we were the reasons we weren't succeeding. It wasn't everybody else's fault. We committed to working on the things we weren't very good at. We worked to remove the ego from the workplace, and it transformed the company. And a lot of great things happened. So I'm proud of what we did. Thank you for listening, and I'll take any questions you have.